So let's get started. I'm very excited to welcome everyone to today's info session focused on the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, or NSF GRFP. I'm Dr. Shannon Connolly. I'm Assistant Dean in the Graduate School here at UTEP, or fake UTEP that you see displayed beautifully behind me. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Melanie Meinzer, who is the relatively new director of the relatively new Office of Student Fellowships and Awards, Director of National and International Fellowships and Awards in that office. And Dr. Meinzer will be serving kind of as our host, admitting folks as they show up and also moderating the Q&A a bit later on in the session. So who's in the room? I am looking at our participant count. I think we're just about at 35 right now. We had about 60 folks pre-register as of 4 p.m. yesterday, and it looked like that list was a really nice mix. I think that by and large, you all are students, ranging from freshmen to seniors, and also graduate students. You come from a diverse range of STEM, social science, and STEM education backgrounds, which is great because you're in perfect position to start thinking about the NSF GRFP. Whether you are a freshman or you're actually in the midst of preparing an application, we hope this session will give you some really useful tools that you can use, whether for NSF GRFP or for other competitive external fellowships you may consider applying for in the future. So thanks to those of you who submitted questions ahead of today's session. Let me advance to the next slide to give you a sense of where we're headed in the next hour or so that we have together. Thanks again to those who submitted questions ahead of time. The presentation is designed to address those questions and some frequently asked questions we've received in previous info sessions like this one. Today is designed to give an overview to provide the critical information you need to know about NSF GRFP, but of course we won't cover everything. I'm going to have to move a little quickly through the overview at the beginning of the session. And so if you have questions, which I hope and expect that you will, if we don't answer them in that first presentation section, write them down and post them to the chat. And Dr. Meinzer will be moderating and keeping an eye on that chat. So we'll have a series of questions prepared when we head into the Q&A, and we'll also try to answer as many of your questions as we can. So a note on this Zoom platform and Zoom etiquette in general. I'm sure many of you have participated in many Zoom meetings, but right now we have all of your microphones muted, and we'll keep it that way until we get to the Q&A. And then if you wish to unmute yourself and pose a question, Dr. Meinzer will call on you, and you can do so by turning on your microphone, or you can just post the question in the chat and Dr. Meinzer will pose it to our guests for you, whatever is more comfortable and easy for you. And we'll try to get to as many of those as we can, but if we don't answer your question or if you have further questions, our contact information is going to be on the last slide of this presentation. Or if you would like to remember it now, you can email studentfellowships@utep.edu. I think you'll also find that email address available to you in the chat. We want to be conversational to the extent that's possible in a virtual format with a relatively large group, and as informal as we can be in that sense. We like to do these in person and get folks working in pairs. That's obviously not possible today, but I hope you'll feel like you're coming away empowered to approach future applications with a new toolkit that you didn't have before. So I now want to introduce our special guests who are here with us today to answer your questions. Like I said, I'll be giving that more unidirectional presentation at the beginning, the overview of NSF GRFP process, timeline, application. Then I'll introduce one of our UTEP voices. I'm really excited that we have with us today Jaime Regis, who is a PhD student in mechanical engineering and a current recipient of the NSF GRFP. And we also have with us Dr. Stephen Kreitz, my colleague in the graduate school, Dean of the Graduate School and Associate Provost, and also a Professor of Psychology. Dr. Kreitz has been a reviewer at the national level for NSF GRFP and has also mentored a number of successful awardees, so can really answer your questions, maybe pull back the curtain on the review process a bit during that Q&A section. That'll be the major first chunk of our time together. We're trying to save some room at the very end for a more interactive component. So for those of you who wish, who feel comfortable and want to stick around with us to the very end, we're going to try to break out into maybe 3 different discussion groups so that you can talk to each other and talk to us. Those will be facilitated by myself and two of my colleagues from the graduate school, Sal Dominguez and Kai Leva, graduate assistants who are working with us on the professional development team. And we'll work with you through a little personal statement activity that I hope would be helpful, not just for GRFP, but for any opportunity you might think about applying for. So let's jump in. To get started, I just wanted to show you 2 slides right off the bat with some contact information, again, for the graduate school. So if you're interested, whether you're a current graduate student, a prospective graduate student, in internal funding opportunities at UTEP and external awards, I encourage you to check out our funding page. You can see the URL, hopefully, at the very bottom of the slide, utep.edu/graduate/funding, and there you'll find a variety of opportunities, both internal to UTEP and external, links to some really great search databases that compile these external opportunities. And this is really important if you find, as you're listening today, that, you know what, I'm not eligible for GRFP. There may be, and there are, quite a few other external opportunities that you can start thinking about now. And we would invite you to contact us if you have questions, or to contact Dr. Meinster's office. And I think I have that information on the next slide. So again, you can reach out via that email for more information about a variety of awards that are available to you, no matter your major and no matter what level you're currently at in your undergraduate or graduate study. So what is the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program? I think not only do we have a diversity of backgrounds in our audience today, we have a diversity of ranges of familiarity with and knowledge about NSF GRFP. So I want to make sure that I'm not taking anything for granted and giving you the background as we dive in. So NSF GRFP is one of the graduate research funding programs of the National Science Foundation, and its mission is to, as you see here, ensure the vitality of the human resource base of science and engineering and to reinforce its diversity. It's a very important part of the NSF GRFP mission. They want to recognize and support outstanding graduate students in STEM and related disciplines, and they provide substantial financial support. This is an opportunity that is a pretty nice one, and has some flexibility and some wonderful professional development opportunities and future career advancement opportunities, I should say, built into it. So as you're thinking about NSF GRFP, there are a couple of things you want to keep in mind as you're getting started. And 2 of the really big ones are eligibility and registration. So we'll walk through those quickly right now. And if you have questions, write them down and we'll get to them later. So as a division of the National Science Foundation, the GRFP has pretty specific eligibility requirements, and I list those here. I would also encourage you, if you have questions, if you don't see something addressed here, to look at the GRFP website, which we're showing here on this slide and several times throughout the presentation, to look there, and also at the program solicitation, because there's a lot more detailed information available on that site. Number 1, this opportunity is open to US citizens, nationals, and permanent residents only. Unfortunately, this one is not open to international students. There are specific requirements regarding where you're at in your degree, particularly if you're a graduate student. So the GRFP is really aimed at seniors who are completing their baccalaureate degree. So those of you who have just finished your junior year, coming into your senior year, the fall is the time for you to be applying for the following year. Post-baccalaureate, if you've already earned your bachelor's degree and you haven't yet started a graduate program, this is a program for you. For graduate students, it can get a little bit specific. Graduate students enrolled in a degree granting program must be in their first year. Now that's a little bit, there are some additional details there, but in general, you have to be in your first year of the program, and you're limited at that point to only 1 application. For undergraduate students, you have the opportunity to apply once as an undergrad, and if you aren't successful, you can try again as a graduate student. For graduate students, unfortunately, you get 1 chance, and it's got to be in that first year. I hope that you can see at the bottom of the slide the detailed information about this award. It's a 3-year annual stipend, which can be used within 5 years. So 3 years of total funding, $34,000 a year, and a $12,000 cost of education stipend to your institution. The registration process, similar to other federal agencies, you're going to need to register first before applying for GRFP. It's changed in the past. They used to use something called FastLane, but we've listed here the website at which you'll need to register your interest when you're ready to apply, right? So when you get to that point as a almost senior or as a graduate student submitting your application in the fall, this is where you want to register. And you can review all sections of the application process on the GRFP website. Personal information and educational background are going to be included in the application, including transcripts, fellowships, scholarships, and other experiences. The proposed graduate program or programs that you're thinking about, you'll indicate your intended major field of study in the application. You'll include letters of reference. We'll talk more about all of these components, but especially the letters of reference shortly. And you'll include a personal and a research statement. We'll talk about those a bit more as well. Pay attention to deadlines. Here they are for 2020. And you'll notice that the GRFP has a week of deadlines starting on a Monday, going through Thursday, broken up by the major fields of study. So you see those posted, I think, pretty comprehensively here on the slide, but again, consult the GRFP website for all of those major fields of study and subfields. This also gives you a sense of the eligible fields for the GRFP. So again, this is an opportunity that comes kind of early in the fall semester, so not something that you want to be thinking about at the last minute. So you're in a good place right now. It's the end of July. Even if you're thinking about applying this fall, I think you still have plenty of time to work on your statements, get them in good shape, and get them submitted by the end of October. And you've got lots of support and resources to help you at UTEP. So what are the elements of a competitive application for the GRFP? I'm outlining them here. We're going to go into a bit more detail in each section as I click through the slides. Do note that those statements I mentioned, the personal statement and the research statement, are short. 3 pages max, Times New Roman, no smaller than 11 point, double spaced, or rather single spaced for the statement, and 2 pages max for the research statement. So you don't have a lot of room, and it's important to make those work together. So how do you do that? Let's walk through these elements. Transcripts are important. Your grades do matter. And perhaps Dr. Kreitz can speak a bit to that during the Q&A. You're going to need to have good grades and a high GPA, but it can be explained in the personal statement. Whenever there are weaknesses, remember that it's a holistic application process, and the reviewer is going to be looking, even if they are doing so quickly, at your entire application. So if you're worried about your GPA, try to explain it, address that, take it head on in your statement. And make sure you give yourself enough time ahead of the application deadlines to request those transcripts. Know your institution's turnaround time and plan ahead. Letters of recommendation are really key for NSF GRFP. I hear that from program officers all the time, and we've seen that it's really a crucial part of the application. And if you are new to the process of fellowship advising, I know it can be a little intimidating to think about asking for references. So we want to provide you a few tips that can help you as you approach that part of the process. In general, and especially for this type of opportunity, you want to get references from faculty members or people who've supervised your research projects directly, who've had involvement in your academic program. So personal references are not going to carry as much weight in this type of application. You really want to go for those academic references, and especially those who have supervised your research work. For this opportunity, applicants must list a minimum of 3 and up to 5 potential reference letter writers. And when you approach those reference letter writers, I advise that you ask them if they can provide you a strong letter. And faculty are very busy, we know, but part of their job is to write letters of recommendation, and they'll tell you if they don't know you well enough. Don't take it personally if that happens, but it really will help you get the best reference letters if you can ask that question. Can you provide me a strong letter? And then help them provide you a strong letter by describing the program. Give them a link to the program solicitation, the main website, so they know what they're writing for. Share with them a copy of your updated CV or resume so they know what you're up to right now. Maybe it's someone who taught you a couple of years ago. They'll appreciate having those materials to really write you the strongest letter possible. And if you can, try to meet with them at this point virtually, schedule a quick phone call, Teams call, and talk about what you've been up to and your plans for this opportunity. And make sure you allow them plenty of time to get their letters in on time. So the statement sections of the application, as I mentioned, are going to include that personal, relevant background and future goals statement, which can be up to 3 pages, and the research statement up to 2 pages. Again, I think perhaps Dr. Kreitz may want to talk about this in the Q&A, or you can ask questions if you have them. He's given some great advice to students in the past about integrating these statements into a singular theme. It's not easy to do that on the first pass. You won't sit down and write a perfect research and personal statement in one go, but as you go through the process of revising these statements with your mentors, your faculty, with your peers, you'll find that you'll able to highlight those themes and then try to integrate them together. Also, again, to get the most out of the very limited page space that you have. You'll also want to make sure that you address the review criteria in each statement. This is super important for any fellowship opportunity, but especially for the NSF opportunities, because they're very interested in 2 things that are very clearly defined. We'll talk about them a little bit more, but maybe save some questions for the Q&A. And those are intellectual merit and broader impacts. You'll hear them again and again as you progress in your career as a scientist if you're applying for opportunities with NSF. As I mentioned, we have hopefully saved a little time at the end of today's session to do a bit of personal statement workshopping. But a leading question that can help you as you go into preparing this statement for GRFP is the one that you see here on the screen. How do you envision graduate school preparing you for a career that allows you to contribute to expanding scientific understanding? So what's the intellectual merit of your work, as well as broadly benefit society, and that's that broader impacts piece. I'll move through these next 2 slides relatively quickly, but again, you'll have them to refer back to. And the graduate school, in conjunction with the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards, will likely schedule some follow-up sessions that will hone in more on the application itself. Here are some tips for how to craft a strong professional statement and things you'll want to keep in mind as you're outlining that statement. You want to describe why you're interested in the opportunity, your professional interests. So how does this award help you advance in your career as a scientist? NSF is very, very interested in that question. So that gets to number 2, how it relates to your career goals. You want to think about how you can differentiate yourself from other applicants. Know that reviewers are going to be reading, again, many, many very competitive applications. So think about what makes you unique. I'm very proud to say that UTEP students do awesome at winning GRFP fellowships, and I've read a lot of their statements, and they win them when they are very specific about what makes them different, unique, what they bring to their community. So I know that UTEP students get this done. And you want to describe those personal and individual strengths that make you a qualified applicant. So really don't be shy, be confident, and get it out there. Say why that you should receive this fellowship. You want to think about all of your applicable experiences. That can mean freshening up your resume, making sure that it's up to date, and then reminding yourself how each of these key experiences has built on the other to get you to the point where you are now, where you're ready to apply for and win this fellowship. And that can take some revising. Include specific team experiences, lab experiences, research experiences, of course, that describe your specific contributions. And then again, make sure that you're hitting on those themes of intellectual merit and broader impacts in your statements. For your research statement, you're going to want to consult with your mentors. If you don't have a mentor at this point, think about the faculty whose courses you've particularly enjoyed, who you've had the opportunity to do some research work with. Who are the individuals who are guiding you through your program? And consult with them. Tell them that you're interested in this opportunity and you want to think about how to shape this research statement. You want to state the problem, think about how it contributes to knowledge, how this is innovative, document your previous work, and present a clear set of research questions. It can be really helpful to describe one study in detail. Again, that's something that I've heard from Dr. Kreitz in the past that makes it very easy for the reviewer to understand this student knows how to do this work. Describe the unique resources that you might have at your disposal at one of the institutions you're planning on attending or where you are now. And again, hit on that intellectual merit and broader impact. So I'm going to show you these slides rather quickly because these two review criteria are very important, but I think that we can talk about them in the Q&A a little bit more and probably more successfully talk through once we're getting to the point where you are drafting your personal statement and your research statement. For right now, I just want to give you, again, that really broad overview of what we're talking about when we say intellectual merit and broader impacts. So you can see some of those written out here on the slide. The intellectual merit review criteria is going to be based not just on one piece, one of the statements, but a holistic analysis of the complete application. So that's why, again, you want to think about integrating themes and bringing everything together in those statements. The strength of the academic record, so your grades and your GPA, this is where that comes into play. And the specific description of previous research experiences, any publications you might have. At the Query Symposium, we have a lot of great opportunities here at UTEP for undergraduate students, especially to get involved in research. So make sure those sing. And your references. Your reference letter writers can speak to your intellectual merit, and we also offer support for reference letter writers to help them write strong letters for these opportunities. Broader impacts. What's the potential of your work to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of these specific desired societal outcomes and goals that the National Science Foundation has in mind? And that can thread throughout your personal and professional experiences and your future plans. The next slide shows some of the priority outcomes that the NSF has been thinking about in recent years. So they're very interested in the full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM. Improving STEM education and educator development is very important. Increased public literacy and public engagement with STEM is another big one. So think about those volunteer experiences you've had here in the community, how you may have worked to increase scientific literacy in El Paso and the region. Those really make for a compelling read in your statements. They want to increase partnerships between academia, industry, and others. Develop a diverse and globally competitive STEM workforce. So some of the advantages of getting a GRFP come into play here. There are a lot of professional development and internship opportunities that you can't apply for unless you have a GRFP. And of course, increased competitiveness of, this is a federal agency, so increased economic competitiveness of the US STEM workforce is going to be an important component. And again, this is just speaking to the fact that reviewers are looking at your application holistically. They're looking at these two factors across all of your materials. And I offer these points here, particularly for the research statement. Some questions to keep in mind when you get to that point. Is the plan for carrying out the proposed activities well-reasoned, well-organized, based on a sound rationale? If you're discussing equipment that no institution anywhere on the face of the earth has access to, that's going to be a red flag. But specificity and really grounded rationale is going to stand out to the reviewers. Does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? You don't have to be a professional program evaluator at this point, but are you thinking about assessment of your work? And how well qualified are you as the individual researcher, the team that you're thinking about working with, how well qualified is that team, person, organization to conduct the proposed activities? And are there adequate resources to carry them out? We would urge you to do this for any fellowship opportunity, not just the GRFP. But as you get to the point where you're ready to apply, develop a timeline. So now is a really good time, if you're applying this fall, to set some due dates for yourself heading up to those October deadlines. Register at the website provided. Create a checklist of all the required elements of the application. Make sure you're requesting those transcripts early. Start drafting your essays and think about who and what are your resources to revise them. Get in touch with your references and start requesting your reference letters and line up those reviews. And a point on those reviews, let's skip over this one. Before I turn it over to my colleague and fellowship recipient to talk a little bit more about what this process is like for him, I'm listing here some of the resources you have available to you at UTEP. Preliminary review, always great to contact the University Writing Center. They have a very talented staff who can review your drafts of materials. For your secondary review, I would encourage you to contact the graduate school. We have a small fellowship advising staff, including some wonderful graduate student assistants who we helped advise some students last year, and we're happy to hear from you again. Our newly established Office of Student Fellowships and Awards, your faculty mentor, and your peers. So try to get as many eyes on these materials as you can. Reviews are really, really critical to putting together a competitive application. And so, I think I have my next slide ready. Without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Jaime Regis, PhD student in mechanical engineering and alum of UTEP for his bachelor's program, who is going to just tell us a little bit more about the research he's currently working on, and then we will open it up for questions. So, Jaime.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Shannon, for the introduction. So, as Shannon mentioned, I'm a PhD student in mechanical engineering. So, most of my research involves additive manufacturing, or as most people know it, 3D printing. And basically, what we do at our research lab is develop new materials for 3D printing with special properties, which we call smart properties, that give it allow it to react to certain stimulus, such as light, heat, and stuff like that. And right now, I'm mainly working on self-healing polymers, so that we can incorporate these into stretchable and wearable devices, so that pretty much they can last for a really, really long time. So I'll be taking some of your questions, and hopefully I can provide a good answer for you to help you get to help craft your NSF GRFP application.
And I'll unmute myself again just to say that so Dr. Meinster will be posing questions first to Jaime, but I also want to remind everyone that we also have Dr. Kreitz available to answer some questions. We have some questions for him as well about especially the review process. And I'm happy to also answer questions about eligibility component. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Meinzer to get us started.
Thank you. I've now unmuted all participants. So if you would like to ask a question verbally, feel free to unmute yourself. So you'll have to click on the microphone button so that the red line is no longer on it, and then you'll be able to speak. So I'll open up the floor to that. And I'll wait a couple of seconds, and then if there are no takers, we'll go to the questions in the chat. So go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you'd like, ask a question to our panelists. Okay, let's start then with some of the questions in the chat, and then it's also open to ask questions verbally if you'd like. So there is a question about someone pursuing economics, finance, mathematics, eligible for the fellowship. Dr. Connolly, I would say this was I believe in economics is, right? And then in certain fields is education. I'm not as familiar with it. Perhaps you can say more. Oh, you're still muted.
Classic move. Yeah, so I would encourage this individual to look at the major fields of study on the GRFP website, where you'll also find listed a number of subfields. The answer is it depends, but possibly, because many of the social science, especially if they are computationally intense, many of those social science subfields will be covered and will be eligible, but it really depends on the thrust of your proposed research. So I would encourage you to look at those social science, at the major field, social science, and drill down where you'll see the individual subthemes, and look there to see if there's one that nicely characterizes the work that you plan on doing. I would say on those major fields of study, they're very important, because the major field you select for your application is going to determine the panel that review it. So you want to make sure that it is as closely aligned as possible to what you're actually doing, because you may not have an expert in your subfield, but you're going to have an expert in your general field who knows what you're talking about and who can give your application a really thorough read. And that's all I'll say on that for now.
Okay, thank you. There's another question. So this is from a first-year PhD student interested in applying for GRFP, graduated with a BS in Bio 4 years ago, has been teaching high school science. Two questions in this one. The first is, for letters of reference, would it be good to get letters from the two schools where they've taught, or is that not scientific enough for NSF? Is the first question. And then the second one is, will it hurt my chances that I don't have any publications?
Dr. Kreitz, would you like to take that one, given your review experience?
Let me take that one. I would recommend not getting letters of recommendation from places where you work. They really need to come. NSF is looking at training kind of researchers, the next group of scientists. You want people who can speak to your ability to do research. With regard to publications, it really depends on the subfield and the field what's expected. So, if you think about what your application, most of the people who have applied, even to get into graduate school, it takes good GPAs and transcripts. So most people who are applying for this are really strong, with regard to their pass grades, their transcripts, etc. It is the case, as Dr. Conley said, if you, for instance, started and had a bad year and your GPA is not quite as high, you could say this, you could point out that your last few years have been great, etc. But there's a couple critical things you have to do. One of them, they will look at that, they will look at your pass grades and transcripts, but nearly everyone is very high, there's not a lot of variance there. What they will look at then is your past research and what you've done. What is expected for that really varies across fields, and it also varies about when you're applying. If you just have an undergraduate degree or in your senior year, there's one set of expectations. They get a little bit higher, as you're in your first year or second year of graduate school. You really need to talk to someone in your own field about what the expectations are. So I can tell you the expectations in psychology because that's my field, but it's going to be different in biology or mechanical engineering or physics, etc. What types of things you need. You just need experience in the lab, you need conference presentations, you need publications, etc. But you have to have some research experience. If you don't have research experience, then things aren't going to go well.
All right, thank you. And so we have some questions about eligibility. There's two here. Does recently earning a master's in the spring of this year make me ineligible for the GRFP for my doctorate? And the second question on eligibility, I've been told I can still apply the fall following my first graduate year. Is this correct, or is it too late?
So I think I can answer both of those, but again, I would always encourage the individual to look at the program solicitation for the details. On the first question, if I'm understanding that situation correctly, you would not be eligible to apply if you have just completed a terminal master's degree in the spring. So GRFP has specific guidelines around that piece. So if you have a terminal master's and you need to have been away from graduate study for 2 consecutive years, 2 continuous years of being out of a degree granting program to again be eligible to apply for a doctoral program. So that's, that can be a bummer, I know. Talked to some really great motivated students who got their master's degree, they want to apply, but unfortunately you do have to have that 2-year break. And if that's the case for you, you really need to address that 2-year break in your statements. So again, look at the program solicitation. This one is always addressed in the FAQs on the GRFP page if you have a master's degree. So the second question was about first year of a PhD program, right? Can I still apply in the fall following my first year? Did I get that one right? I think so.
See.
Yes.
I think so. Yeah. The answer to that is possibly. And again, that one is very high in the list of FAQs on the GRFP page. There's I don't think it's even 12-month window. It's even more specific than that, related to the August that you started and the first day of classes at your university. If you're a doctoral student entering your second year, so if this fall is going to be your second year, look closely at the solicitation under eligibility and see if you're within the time frame. It's possible that you can be, but you want to check that before you get too far down the road with your application.
Okay, let's see here. This is a question for Jaime. Did you apply your senior year or in graduate school? What would you say your undergraduate experience looked like, and what helped you win this fellowship?
So I actually didn't apply in undergraduate. I applied as a PhD student. And that's primarily because I started as a senior doing research. So the summer before starting my senior year, that's when I started to do research. And I started my research at Stanford University through a summer program that is kind of like a bridge between UTEP and Stanford. So that's when I started doing research, and I didn't find out about the GRFP until my first year of graduate school. And then what was the second part of it?
Let's see. So what would you say your undergraduate experience looked like that helped you win the fellowship?
So pretty much a lot of hands-on work with doing research, doing experiments. And at the time of applying, I already had a submitted publication from the work that I did my senior year.
Okay.
I can speak to that one as well. So when people start reviewing, and I've reviewed 5-6 times for the NSF. So what you'll see is, and I already said this before, most people have pretty good GPAs, transcripts, etc. You'll occasionally get someone who doesn't, but you know, oftentimes there's an explanation for that. You look at that explanation. Nearly everyone also has research experience. Now, if they have enough, that's another issue, and that's going to depend on the field, and I've already said that. A absolutely critical thing is how well your application is written. And I cannot stress this enough. In applications that are written well, that explain the research, are evaluated much higher. One of the things, I mean, you have 5 pages to kind of explain what it is you've done with your past experiences, the research, and what it is you would like to do. And those 5 pages need to be written really well. There's all kinds of ways to write well. There's different approaches to this, but typically the person who is reviewing it, as a reviewer, you're going to read 30 to 50 of these reviews, and you're going to spend 15 or 20 minutes on each one. And that means reading these 5 single-space pages, looking at the reference letters, looking at the transcripts, etc. So that those 5 pages that you have to be very clear. And one of the best ways to do that is make sure you have a theme or story that you're telling throughout. You know, what did you do as an undergraduate? How did that help you to get into graduate school? How does that connect to that type of thing? There's so many of these. The people have exceptional stories. They've done, you know, a lot of things, but they're not connected. They're just, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. Those ones will not get good reviews from people. You need to kind of tie these together and write well. Another thing about this is that if it's hard to read and follow, it's probably sunk. You know, see a lot of these things where people use, because you have such a short amount of time, people try to do things quickly. They use lots of abbreviations or jargon. And the reviewers may be from your subfield, but not from your specialty area. So in my discipline, for instance, there's probably a dozen or so subfields, and I'm in one of those. And your reviewers likely be in that subfield. But in my subfield, there's probably, you know, 100 different areas of research, and I maybe know 3 of them. And I could be reviewing something from, you know, an area outside of my own. As a matter of fact, I think that in the review process, when I read, let's say, 40 of these a year, there's probably 2 or 3 that are from my specific area. So you have to write to people who are kind of, you know, general. You can't use a lot of jargon. You know, you have to be very, very clear in this description. And I think that probably the clarity of your proposal and the research is probably the most important part of determining who gets done. Okay? And your past experience is important, but most people applying have pretty good past experiences. So it comes down to how well can you kind of talk about this and communicate this. It is critical. That's all.
Thank you. So there is another question I think is related to this that I would like to go to. Let's see, the chat has disappeared here for me. A second. Where'd that go? Okay. So here's the question for Dr. Kreitz. So as the variance in grades will presumably be quite low, so not a lot of variation in the GPAs of applicants, the next item on the list for reviewers will be past research publications. Does this mean that senior undergraduates have a lower chance than MS and PhD applicants and should therefore apply later on while doing a master's?
Not necessarily, because how the review process works is that when you're a reviewer, you start with actually senior undergraduates. And although research is expected, the bar of how much research needs to be done is going to be a little bit different. So in my field, for instance, we're not going to expect publication from people who are still in their undergraduates. So if you have a student who has lots of research experience, worked with a few faculty, maybe has done conference presentations, maybe submitted a publication, that will be very competitive. If you're talking about a student who is now in their 2nd year of graduate school and now submitting it, that is not competitive at all. You're going to expect publications. So it really depends on someone's level. You know, if you have a strong research background, but maybe no publications, you know, as an undergraduate, you'll be in good shape if you can kind of talk about what you've done, what you want to do, and do a compelling story.
Thank you. A couple of eligibility questions. So Dr. Connolly, these may be more up your alley. Let's take them in order. So the first one is being a transfer student from EPCC, can I still apply? I feel that even I, not knowing NSF GRFP, can say yes. When you get to the stage where you apply, yes. Another question on eligibility. As a senior who is interested in doing fast track, could I participate and still qualify? Also, if we graduate in the fall and intend to start graduate school in the spring, would that impact our application date?
I'll take the first part of that first, and then I might have to have you remind me the second part about fast track. And this is addressed again pretty often in the GRFP FAQs because a lot of schools do joint bachelor's, master's programs that are similar to fast track, but GRFP does consider those to be master's programs. It doesn't just qualify you. I don't want to give you misinformation, so let me just say that my memory of the FAQ that I looked at yesterday on this point, is that yes, you can apply, but they're going to consider you a graduate student when you're applying if you're in a fast track or joint degree program. So you'll want to keep that in mind in the timing. I'll look again at the specific guidance on the GRFP website, and maybe we can include an FAQ when we post this webinar, or if you like, you can share your info and we'll get back in touch with you. So the answer to that is yes, probably, but just do be mindful that they'll consider you a graduate student if you're in a joint degree program. And then the other part.
The second half was about if that would impact the application date. My sense is it wouldn't, right? Because there's only one per year, correct?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. All right, so let's keep going here. So there's a question about having received a fellowship from NSF as an undergraduate researcher and to include that in the application. Again, I feel I can answer this with yes, absolutely. That will be very important. Let's see, we have another question. What if we have research experience, but it's not in the specific topic that you will be applying for? Will that hurt my chances?
Let me, am I unmuted? Let me take that one. It is often the case that people have research experience that's not related to what they're doing. Because, you know, as an undergraduate student, you're going to school, you identify with the faculty, you're doing one research, and then you realize, you know, as you're doing that, you know, I kind of interested in something else. So it is very, very common for people to have research experience that is not directly related to what they're doing. This gets to that writing component that I said before. One of the really, really important things to do is to try to kind of somehow link that previous research experience to what you're doing. So sometimes, you know, students may say, listen, I was doing this, and then I realized, you know, while doing this, that this topic was more interesting. And now I'm doing this topic, but I learned these skills from the past things, and I'm taking these ideas and skills and applying them in this new area. So yes, it is very, very common for people to have different research experiences, because that's almost the nature of the game. As an undergraduate, you're working with the people that you have. One of the critical things is how people weave these into kind of one related narrative, you know, that explains, you know, these different experiences. That starts to really separate the people. You know, some people will just list it, you know, they've worked with 4 different faculty, they did this, they did this, they did this. Another person, the person who can weave all of these together into a theme is going to be evaluated much higher.
Thank you. Okay, so we have no more new questions at this point in the chat. Is there anybody who has a question who'd like to ask it verbally, or, oh, we have another one. Okay, I'm a senior undergrad who will be taking a graduate class next semester that is for graduate credit. Would this be treated like fast track, like the fast track? So a senior taking a graduate class, would that be like being on the fast track program?
I think the answer to that is no. Dr. Kreitz, is that also your?
I don't know. I think that would also be no as well.
Yeah, that they would be in fine shape. I mean, a class reservation for graduate credit is different than being in a fast track program. So you would still be considered receiving an undergraduate degree. Again, it can get technical, and always make sure based on your specific situation. But my sense of that is that no, you would still be considered an undergraduate, and you wouldn't have those restrictions like a fast track program in applying for GRFP.
Okay, so we have another question about research experience. And this one is, if I have no research experience, would it be better to apply at the end of the first year of my PhD? And I'm guessing that they mean instead of as a senior.
My recommendation would be yes. I mean, research experience is going to be critical. So, yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by no research experience. I mean, you can apply, so if the rules haven't changed, you can apply once as an undergraduate student, and then once as a graduate student types of thing. So, yeah, but with no research experience, it's going to be really hard to to get the award even as an undergraduate. But if there's other experiences you've had, if there's classes that have research components, things like that and so forth, that might work. It really depends on each person's situation.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, hi. Just kind of piggybacking off of that same question regarding the research. I'm the one that said that I graduated from my bachelor's in biology, and then I've taught at a public institution teaching science. And now I'm going back to work on my PhD. So I understand that research is a really big caveat in the application. If I have a very strong mentor backing me, and we have a very detailed research plan, we know exactly what we're looking for. He's already had a very similar project accepted by the NSF, and the one that I would be working on is kind of related to that. It's still very visible. We're working on biology and hybridization of species, etc. Would the specificity of that project work in my favor, or should I also wait for a year to do a year of my PhD and then apply?
It's really hard to give this. So some of this depends on, who your reviewers are. But I'll tell you that when you meet, one of the themes that they're always saying is that we are funding people, not projects. So NSF says, they're not funding kind of like, a research grant that a faculty will get is kind of like, here's the project I want to do, and NSF is evaluating that particular project. For these ones, the focus is on the people themselves. So a specific project perhaps isn't going to be evaluated as well. You need to put together kind of a package that is focused on you as a person and your research types of things. That's going to probably be essential. Now, having said that, that's the instructions that NSF gives everyone. Each reviewer is going to be slightly different. Some reviewers are going to focus a little bit more on your past research. Other ones will look at, letters of recommendation, a little bit more different types of things. So there's always a chance, for anyone to apply types of things. But the other thing to keep in mind is that how this works is that for each person who, each application, it's reviewed by at least 3 people. And the only way that you're going to get a chance of getting funded is if each one of those says that it's very good or excellent. That's kind of like excellent, very good, etc. But 3 people kind of all need to agree on that type of thing.
Okay, thank you. Just one last question on that, and I'm sorry, I'm hogging up your time. I already kind of have like half of the personal statement written and half of the research statement written. Would emphasizing education and the fact that I still have connections to the education community here in El Paso, and considering that it's a low-income area, that kind of thing, is that a good thing to emphasize in the application?
Yes, so this comes to, NSF is looking at 2 things: intellectual merit, and like I said before, it's not necessarily the intellectual merit of the project. The project could be great, but what they want to do is identify people who will do great things through their career. Okay, so intellectual merit is one, but broader impacts is another one. And Dr. Conley talks some about this. Your background in teaching, spreading information is one way of broader information, the ability to communicate to others and show this is important and things like that. So with regard to broader impact, I think that your background in teaching could be a real asset. One of the aspects though is to kind of make sure, try to kind of sell yourself as, with research experience and things like that. I mean, you can use a specific project you're doing, but you're also going to have to do enough things to kind of communicate, here's why I will be a good researcher from past experience, etc. And this is true of everyone. Each individual, there's all kinds of different stories and ways to do this. So there's not one way to kind of do this, but you kind of need to make sure you hit both of those points, intellectual merit and broader impact types of things. It is, it depends a lot on the area types of things, but I've seen people funded who intellectual merit isn't quite as high, but broader impact is off the charts and vice versa types of things. It's really hard to hit both of them in all honesty. So you can always try to kind of work on one or the other and the strengths of one.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sarah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Kai Leva. I'm one of the grad students, and I've helped mentor people, a few people last year in their fellowship stories. And one of the people that I did mentor had a similar kind of story to yours, a large gap between getting the bachelor's and going into graduate programming and everything. And she was funded. She had a very strong broad impact. And okay. I think you have an excellent narrative as a teacher, working in the community and being able to tell a story about wanting to work in the community and help other people from the community to grow as scientists is a really excellent story to tell.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks, Kai, for jumping in. That's such a good point. Telling your story and telling it well is important for this opportunity and any fellowship you apply for. If I can, I know we said we would be here for an hour, and I want to honor everyone's time, especially because we're getting close to lunch. But I think that leads us into a good final question that I want to pose to Jaime. And it has a couple parts, so I hope you'll forgive me. But we had some questions submitted ahead of time and some recommendations from other GRFP winners that I think will help some of you who are current students who may be earlier in your undergraduate career and thinking about this for the future. So Jaime, I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about what it was like for you. So how did you identify your research mentor first? How did you go about that process? And then if you could say a little more about what the process of preparing your application was like. You mentioned when you started doing it, but what resources did you use? How many drafts did you go through? Whatever you feel like sharing with us, I'm sure they would love to hear.
Okay, so starting off the first question, how I identified my mentor. So this was somewhat of a really complicated process because I had been applying for years now to be into a research position. So I didn't get my first break into research until I actually applied for that summer research program. So after coming back from the summer research program, well, it made me a little more well-suited for research in the eyes of the professors. So I identified a professor that I really liked the type of research that they were doing. Unfortunately, this professor didn't have the funding for it, but he referred me to someone who was doing relatively similar research. And that's how I came to be with the mentor that I have right now, which is Dr. Yirong Ling. And then for the application process, so I actually got a relatively early start in the application process for the GRFP. And that's because I applied to a second fellowship before the GRFP. So I applied for the LSAM Bridge to Doctorate program, which had a similar, it's practically the same application process as the GRFP. So this was designed so that the applicants for the Bridge to Doctorate could have a really strong application afterwards to apply for the GRFP. So the way I started is by looking into a lot of resources. So I started with this database. If you type in Google, Alex Hunter Lang GRFP, you'll be able to find this big database of past GRFP winners, honorable mentions, and some even that didn't get it. but they'll have their personal statements, and they'll have their research statement as well. And then some even have the feedback from the reviewers. So I spent a lot of time studying these. I went into, looked at the ones that didn't receive it, what feedback did they get, looked at the ones with honorable mentions, what feedback did they get, looked at the ones that were awarded, what feedback did they get. So kind of just see what distinguished the ones that didn't get it from the ones that were honorable mentions from the one that were actually awarded. And a lot of the things that I saw with this, two main differences that I noticed. One of them is that most that were awarded had the three reviewers. The ones that didn't only had two. And as Dr. Kreitz mentioned, they had excellent, good, very good, because they give you like just a one word or two word if it's good. And then the second thing that I noticed is that most of these had very good broader impacts, because a lot of these that were honorable mentions and awarded, they had very, very good intellectual merit. But the ones that were awarded had very good broader impact as well. And after doing a lot of studying, I started drafting. I know this application process might seem like a lot to take in at the moment, but if you start off with the small steps, such as registering, uploading your transcripts, asking for letters of recommendation, it'll help you ease you into the process of starting it. Then just start writing. I think that's the best recommendation I can give you about starting with your personal and research statements. Just start writing. Like you can count on the resources that UTEP offers, such as the University Writing Center. So in all honesty, I spend almost every day at the University Writing Center because they can help you craft kind of just like your ideas that you have in your head into sentences. And not only that, like once you already have your draft written up, they can help you look into your grammar, help look into your spelling, if this sentence doesn't connect with this other sentence. So they'll pretty much help you put it together. And fortunately for me, when I started writing this, they didn't have a lot of people going in because it was during a Maymester. So I think if you start early, there shouldn't be a lot of people in there because assignments are not due yet and stuff like that. So you'll have a much easier time reaching out to someone at the University Writing Center. And then also, there was a lot of faculty that I went to ask for suggestions on the research statement. My advisor was a really big help in this part. So it was a lot of back and forth between me and my advisor to see if this makes sense, kind of like treating it as a publication. Is everything clear? Would someone picking it up for the first time would understand it or something like that? So it was a lot of back and forth between a lot of people. A lot of people got to read my statements, and also the letters of recommendation. I would say if you want a well-written letter of recommendation that addresses all the things that the NSF is looking for, draft it up. Like, don't just expect the person that you're gonna have write your letter of recommendation to know exactly how you want what you want them to include. If you draft it up, they'll know what you want them to include, what you want them to talk about, and things like that. And on the subject of letters of recommendation, even if you don't get the NSF GRFP, or if you do, be sure to thank them, because you never know when you're going to need another letter of recommendation from them. And then that's it, I guess. It was a lot of writing, a lot of drafts, and a lot of reviewing. So.
No, that's awesome advice. And thank you for mentioning too the thank you piece. That's something we always tell students who come to us for fellowship advising. I'm sure Dr. Meinzer would agree. It's a nice thing to do, and it's also the right thing to do. People are busy, they're happy to do it for you, but it's always nice to get a thank you. and that'll stand you in good stead as you move forward. So again, since I know we wanted to be flexible with today, and I'm so glad you all had amazing questions. So I am perfectly happy that we went the entire time in the Q&A. But I want to ask my colleagues, Dr. Kreitz and Dr. Meinzer, is there anything else you wanted to add before I share my screen again, show our contact information, and maybe talk about follow-up steps?
I just want to reiterate what Jaime talked about doing fits perfectly with my experience as a reviewer types of things. It's these ones that are well written, knowing what's there. What you actually do see a lot is that lots of people don't really even talk too much about broader impact or expect you to think about it, and so his comments of looking at that. So I can't tell you how many reviews that I've written that's kind of like, no discussion of broader impacts, or I could also say things like, there are broader impacts here, but the person never fleshed them out, things like that. So, and the only way to get something written well is to go through multiple drafts. So yeah, many drafts will actually finally get it into shape where it can kind of have that memorable impact. So that's all I need to say.
I would add on to that, and I think that website that Jaime shared is a tremendous resource. What I always tell students to do when applying for fellowships is draft your statements first. So it's great to have templates, and you can learn so much from others' successful essays, but make sure that your narrative, particularly for your personal statement, that you have a good sense of who you are and how you want to communicate that to the committee first before you look at others. And then also want to repeat what Dr. Connolly said about my office being a great resource for that secondary review. So please reach out at studentfellowships@utep.edu.
And that is, I think, perfect timing for me to share my screen one more time and show that email address. I'll also share our email address in the graduate school. Okay. And I know that we didn't get to every single question. I think there were a few that we left unanswered on the topic of eligibility today. And I would encourage you to reach out to us at either one of these contact emails I'm going to share. Let me just drag it to the end, so that we can answer specific questions based on your specific situation. Okay. Oops. So there, hopefully you're all seeing, I see some nods, our contact email in the graduate school, gradfund@utep.edu, and Dr. Meinzer's general email in the Office of Student Fellowships and Awards, studentfellowships@utep.edu. We're looking forward, we're so glad you're here, and we're really looking forward to partnering on helping students for the GRFP and going forward even more opportunities and really increasing the volume of applications that go out and awards that come to UTEP. We've got great students doing fantastic things, and we're here for you to help you along in that journey. So I want to thank you all for being with us today and for sticking around a few extra minutes. Like I said at the start, we had hoped that we might save a little time to do a little interactive breakout activity, but I think what we'll do is we'll schedule a follow-up session. Dr. Meinzer, if that sounds good to you, maybe we can look at the calendar in the next month or so and schedule another more interactive, smaller session perhaps for those of you that are preparing applications for the fall. And then we can really dive into questions about your statement. And again, we are always here for you for one-on-one consults using those emails you see on the screen. So thank you again. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Dr. Kreitz. Thank you, Kai and Sal, my colleagues in the graduate school. And thank you, Dr. Meinzer. Thanks to all of you for being here. And take good care. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.